Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's online panel discussion. We are going to be talking about how measuring team performance isn't getting any easier. And I am your host today, Scott Carey. I am the editor-in-chief here at LeadDev, and I'm joined by two brilliant panelists to talk about this topic and the report that we recently published with O'Reilly, the Engineering Team Performance Report 2025. It's actually our third edition of that report, and I'm really excited to get into some of the subtleties and some of the details that we've seen kind of change or mostly not change over those 3 years. So Jezil and Sean, I'll get to introduce you both in a second. I can see some attendees still coming in, but while they are, I'll do some housekeeping. So this panel discussion will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will be heading over to the LeadDev Slack, where we can answer any questions that are left over or any questions you might have after the call. That channel is the hashtag webinar Q&A channel. We also should have time to answer questions live. So there's a Q&A functionality in Zoom. Type your questions in there and send them in, and I will try and get to as many of them during the session as we can. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. So Sean, let's start with you. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you doing? How's everyone else doing too?
Yeah, tell us in the comments. Jezil, how are you? How you doing?
Doing good. Bright and early here in the West Coast. So
nice. So let's tell us a little bit about yourself, Jezil, and what you're up to at Quora AI.
yeah, so currently I'm the co-founder CTO of Quora. We're building agents for account management and post-sales. So we build agents that manage enterprise customer workflows, launch management, engagement, value reporting. And before Quora, I was working in another agentic AI startup that was in healthcare. But overall, been in the industry for 15 plus years in all sorts of capacity. I see engineering leadership, managed very tiny teams and also very large ones. And I've kind of seen the pain of mentoring, coaching engineers, and also kind of upskilling myself as an engineer. So pretty excited to dive into this report. There's some very interesting findings that I'm sure we'll get into.
Nice. And Sean, tell us a little bit about what you do at O'Reilly.
Yeah, so I'm an engineering director at O'Reilly, and I manage a few teams. And some of those teams are the mobile team. We have O'Reilly that develops a mobile app for our learning platform. And I also manage some data teams and our AI team, which has been fun. As far as like my background, I've been in the industry for, greater than 15 years, almost 20 years or so. I just checked, it'll be 20 years here in a year, which is kind of crazy to me. And I, similar to Jessel, I've done everything from, IC roles, working at large multi-billion-dollar corporations, to working at very small teams with, one other dev. So I've kind of seen the landscape of what teams are like and what kind of it means to be a leader in engineering, and it's been something that's been a fun journey for me.
Yeah, nice. I just came back from New York for LeadDev New York, and it was interesting because I always think that the average tenure in tech is short, but I was just shocked by how many conversations I had with folks who had worked at places 10, 15, 20 years. And so maybe we're self-selecting. Maybe there are people that come to LeadDev that just like stay in good places, maybe. But yeah, it's wild to me that you see that kind of tenure still today. It's not the kind of narrative that you hear. And so to set a little bit of context before we get into the discussion here, this is our second year in a row publishing the Engineering Team Performance Report in association with O'Reilly. It's our third year doing the report as a whole. And what we really try and do with this report, and have done from the start, is trying to understand like how and why you measure engineering team performance. And this was the first ever report we did at LeadDev. And the reason we focused on this topic is because it just relentlessly came up when we were talking to our audience and to our members of our community in terms of it being something that is just hard. It is like really difficult, and no one has like a tried and like true way of doing it repeatedly. Like there are picking metrics is hard, like working out what KPIs and what targets you're going to set. How do you get people to rally behind those? How do you upskill efficiently to like keep that performance humming? Like there's just so much to think about, and I think that and a lot of engineering managers spend a lot of time thinking about this topic. So we want to put some data behind that. I think the headline for this session today, measuring team performance never seems to get any easier, basically reflects my like top takeaway when I was writing this report. It just like 3 years in now, it seems to me like a lot of these things like don't move. Like it just, if anything, there's a few kind of industry standard practices that we started to see emerge, and then they kind of dropped again this year. And so in terms of, and I know we're going to get into this because I think Sean and Jez will have interesting takes on kind of frameworks and kind of popular ways of measuring productivity and performance. But yeah, my takeaway was that it doesn't seem to be getting any easier, even though we spend so much time and effort thinking about this, which I think is always interesting. In terms of like the kind of top takeaways, so just to kind of give you some headline figures before we get into the conversation. So 53% of respondents still can't choose the right metrics to measure team performance. This is stubbornly the like biggest pain point when it comes to measuring team performance, is just choosing the metrics that you're gonna measure. 65% avoid measuring lines of code. This was like a big talking point a couple of years ago, especially when Elon Musk took over Twitter and made it one of their key KPIs. But it's still just like an unpopular, and probably deservingly so unpopular, metric for measuring team performance. And we can get into that a bit as well. The one that stood out to me was 41% believe DORA is an effective measurement framework, which was down from 56% in 2024. We're definitely going to talk about that. And then learning and development shot up in terms of priorities from 70% last year to 83%. And so there's an interesting kind of focus on learning and development, which maybe will take a few people by surprise. And so the other thing that I've done today is included this report in the resources section. So for anyone on this call, you can go click on resources, and there's some documents there, and you can actually download the full report and check it out after this call if you want to do that. We normally ask you for a bunch of details, but there you go, you can just download it. So that's reward for giving us your time. Cool. I've talked too much, and really I want to hear from you, Sean and Jezreel, about like what kind of jumped out at you about this report. So that's my first question. Sean, when you first sat down to read this report this year, what kind of jumped out?
To me, like the decline in DORA was something that stood out to me, and I think there's a few reasons why it stood out. But personally, it's something that I know that I've paid attention to and cared a lot about, like in terms of measuring. I think that it was I don't know if I want to say it was revolutionary. That might be really a little bit too much, but it was a really helpful framework for thinking about tracking teams and tracking performance. And to see a decline in that, to me, was interesting. And I think it also speaks a little bit to kind of what I've encountered and what I've felt. When I've talked to other engineering leaders, when I've talked to, even just people at, my company that I work at O'Reilly, I think that it's definitely something that, I see this, I guess, realization that, maybe DORA doesn't solve everything for everyone. So yeah, that was something to me that really stood out.
Nice. What about you, Jessel?
Yeah, I think DORA was definitely one. The other thing that stood out was how the prompt engineering as a skill and people and teams wanting to upskill in that area just shot up to #1 straight up. Like, and that's just like I've never seen anything like that, because all the other ones are like slightly ebbing and flowing through the years. But yeah, also in addition to that, I think Scott, you'd pointed this out, was like the disparity between managers versus IC in wanting to skill in that area, and that is so fascinating. And I think that also like points to a little bit of a perception gap between ICs kind of thinking, hey, like what value do I bring in this organization? And that value is like hard technical skills versus kind of management. It has shifted in perception, thinking that Oh, the value may be like the broader context of the organization, the customer context, and thus like us needing to get better at like prompt engineering and that kind of stuff. So yeah, very interesting to kind of unpack that and what that means.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating in the report. And just to kind of like unpick it a little bit, we basically asked folks like, what area are you most interested in upskilling around? And prompt engineering and managing agents shot to the top of the pile. And it was like clearly the most popular area. But when we just split out the engineers or the individual contributors, it dropped by about 20 percentage points. And so they're like, this is something that I see in the market a lot, which is this gap between the kind of pragmatic realism of engineers who are like, yes, okay, you know, it's another tool in the toolbox. Whereas the further up the ladder you seem to go, the more that kind of fervent kind of excitement seems to build. And I think a lot of engineering managers, especially middle managers, have found themselves stuck between that rock and a hard place. Sean, was there anything you wanted to add on that before I jumped ahead and got back to DORA? But yeah.
Yeah, no, honestly, like I think it's related. I think as you see skills that even 5 years ago weren't in the lexicon of anyone, becoming what I'll call like standard kit for engineers. I think you see less, like this is why I think DORA is maybe interesting. DORA's declining, is because it feels like you see more of an interest in like business outcomes and more an interest in seeing like what can be delivered versus like how it's being delivered, because I think there's a lot of unknowns. Like I still think we're figuring out as, you know, a larger group how to really deliver effectively with AI tooling in a way that is I'll call it maybe trackable. I don't know. There's, I think, a lot of different skill sets that are required now that weren't required before. And to me, like I think that there's a relation between a decline in DORA and an uptick in the use of AI and the requirement of it to be something that is every engineer is using. So I see it like it being very related.
Yeah, and I'll just
Nice.
add
Yeah,
real quick to that is like DORA essentially is tracking the artifact of delivery, right? Like it's tracking code, and code itself, when you think about it, is now getting more and more commoditized, and AI is really getting good at generating code. So that's why I think there's that drop in like excitement for DORA, and kind of shifting that to measuring something else that's more qualitative and measuring the engineering like context and communication and the broader landscape.
yeah, I think that DORA narrative is interesting. It really caught my eye in the report because I mean I was hosting a dinner with engineering leaders in New York last week, and the topic came up, and it kind of evokes quite strong feelings because like some people are really bought in and like they've got it working for them, and like there's like, and that's why it's become popular, is because I think it's quite easy to get started with DORA. Once you get it kind of humming, like you're gonna be able to kind of track a lot of really important things. But then I get the impression that you hit a bit of a ceiling with it, and then that's maybe why this sentiment is coming down. Maybe as maturity increases, sentiment comes down. I don't know, Sean, have you got any view on that hypothesis that I've thrown at you?
I don't know. So yeah, I think DORA's really great. Like, I don't know. I think in terms of like analogies, a lot of times in metaphors. And to me, DORA is measuring, like, if you look at a car, like it's measuring the performance of the engine. Like, how is that engine performing? Like, is it performing really well? Like, is it like, you know, what's going on with it, right? Is it spewing out a lot of smoke, like some cars that I probably owned in my teenage years, or is it a little more of a high performance vehicle, right? And I think that it's great for tracking that. But if you are in a car and you're not going anywhere, it doesn't matter how great the engine performs. And I think that, or if you're in a car and there's no seats for the people that are driving it, right? And I think that what we're seeing is more, which I'm really happy about actually, is more a trend towards the qualitative aspects, right? And not just the performance aspects in terms of like how we're delivering. I think that there's a larger picture that DORA misses out on, that that's really important as an engineering leader to understand about your team. And I think that having we keep on using the word context, but having that context, I think, is very important in order to understand like how the team performs and how the team delivers beyond, what is our mean time to recovery, or, what's our, lead time or something like that for changes. I think those are important metrics, right? I think those are very important to track. And I think that it would be foolhardy to walk into a situation where you're not tracking something like that to understand, at the end of the day, what's being delivered. But it is only a slice of a larger picture. And I think maybe we're starting to see people realize that or come to that conclusion more.
Yeah, and we haven't mentioned space yet, and that was a real effort by the original authors of DORA to try and round out that picture, to try and bring in the quality as well as the kind of quantifiable metrics. Jezza, what's your view on, because like in the report, we've never really seen space kind of catch up to DORA in terms of popularity. We ask a bunch of questions around kind of like, is this something you use? And it's just never really kind of got out of that minority kind of position. And what do you think about why that might be, Jessel?
Yeah, I think the beauty of DORA is it's so clear. And it's like you know exactly what you need to measure, how you need to measure it. Space, on the other end, kind of expands and broadens the aperture and says, okay, we're not going to dictate exactly what you need to measure, but we'll just tell you like the dimensions that are important. And then we'll give you the agency to decide like how you measure those dimensions and how you actually track them. So I think that inherently creates a little bit of cognitive load and makes it so that it's not a standard framework across organizations. It leaves a lot on the organization. Like, how do we measure this? How do we come up and like figure out that there's engineering team cohesion and happiness? What do we want to measure underneath the hood of each of those dimensions? And I think that it creates that uphill friction in adoption. And even if you adopt it, open question on like, did you measure the right thing? And then is it moving the needle with your actions year over year? It's not so clear as DORA is.
Yeah, Sean, anything to add on that?
Yeah, it's super new too. I mean, like the fact that it's represented on here at all, like I think I'm looking at the report right now, and it's represented as pretty substantial, I think, for being so new. I think, what was it? I forget when it was. It was like 2021 or something like that. It's a fairly new.
I was gonna
like that.
ballpark about 5 years. That checks
Yeah,
out.
something like that. And I think that, and I mean, I didn't hear about it until the last couple of years, I think. And so I think that it's really interesting how quickly it has come on the heels of DORA. And DORA itself isn't that old either. Like, and I think going back to what was the subtitle of this, measuring team performance isn't getting any easier. I think that that's a trend that like there's always a framework. There's always something that will replace the next one, and you'll see the thing that was really important one day suddenly is not important the next, or it's abhorrent, you shouldn't use it. But I think a lot of the tracking of metrics, I think, really we can't lose sight of like the true purpose of this, which is to understand and to paint a picture of the landscape of the team and how the team's performing, right? And part of that, like, I think, I don't know, maybe this is a controversial take. I think sometimes managers and leaders and CTOs and whoever within engineering, we tend to lean on metrics as a crutch and something that we can just point to because it's quantitative and we're looking for some hard data. We leave out like the people aspect of it, right? And we leave out, I think, sometimes our like job as managers, which is to understand the context of what these metrics mean and to understand what's going on behind the change in lead time, right? Maybe there's a good story there that's actually really important. And I think that's why I think like not having something and not measuring in some way is flying blind, and you definitely don't want to do that. But you also have to really understand and bring like the understanding that you you have as a human to these situations, because numbers are just, lines on a spreadsheet without that. And I think we have to make sure that we don't lose sight of that.
Yeah, that kind of brings me like neatly onto my next question. But then Kristen Belcher, a friend of the show, has actually kind of asked my question for me. So I'm gonna ask her question instead, which is how do you view the balance of these metrics? So how do you balance quantitative and qualitative within the context of your teams? Jess, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I think as engineering leaders, you kind of have to have the pulse on how your team is doing, and qualitatively, you're just checking in with those teams, like having one-on-ones, kind of writing down like feedback, and once you kind of build a broader contextual understanding of how this team is humming, then you know like what's working, what's not working, what are the themes that are working and not working, and then you reverse engineer from there and say, okay, now I think we have some hard metrics that we should measure. Like maybe there's a lot of like customer fires. Then we're like, okay, well, do we not have the right alerting? Do we not have our mean time to recovery is not right? Then you kind of attach those metrics, and that, Sean, to your point, is like just measuring metrics blindly is not going to tell you anything. It's really, you kind of have to come in with like, what problem are we trying to solve, and then kind of backing into that.
Yeah, what do you think, Sean?
I got lost looking at all the Q&A questions.
I know.
Which question?
I need
Which
to keep
question was
not
this
doing that.
one?
This was so I've already moved it on, but it was Kristen's, and it was, yeah, how do you balance qualitative and quantitative in the context of your teams?
Yes. Okay. Man, that's the question, right? I think that you have to have some level of quantitative information to understand what's happening, right? And I think I've seen a lot of different approaches to quantifying qualitative aspects of teams and how teams perform, and with varying degrees of success. I know one of the things that we've used at O'Reilly on some teams is the Petals framework, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. Essentially, you're essentially asking the engineers, the ICs in the team, how things are going, and using that to track kind of metrics over time, which I really like, because it tells a story and shows a picture of like what the team feels, versus just like how the team is doing. And I think those oftentimes really go hand in hand. So I think, definitely try to apply quantitative measurements to, those qualitative aspects. I also think that, and this might just be, maybe a little too old school, I don't know, or too simple. Just talk. You have to communicate. You have to communicate with your engineers. You have to communicate with people. I have a standing policy of I will make it awkward in our one-on-ones based on a Medium article I read many, many years ago by, I think, someone who worked at Facebook. I can't remember who exactly right now. But I try to make it awkward in my one-on-ones and try to ask questions that really give me an understanding of how the team's doing, because these are all inputs. These are all things that allow us to understand as leaders and as managers, how things are actually going. Because numbers can tell a story that aren't true, and you have to rely to a certain degree on your instincts and your what you're hearing from people who are actually working at, I'll say, the code level, to understand like what's actually happening and how to maybe move things forward. I think that's a really hard question to answer too, though, because you've also got every team is also really different too, and so yeah, I don't want to take that out. I think that's an out, right? But I do think that is like the question.
I'll just say that, like, if the authors of Space were here, they would say that, hey, like, that is the way you do it. It's the qualitative and quantitative, like the nice balance of each. But then it's again, of course, up to every Oregon leader, just like, okay, what do I measure in that bucket? But at least that's like an overarching foundation is Space, I believe.
I think you're spot on, Sean. Like there just isn't a shortcut. Like you've got to talk to people. Like you're with the DORA metrics, you're able to maybe get a bit of a diagnosis, but you're not able to actually like cure anything if you don't talk to your engineers, and kind of like try and get to that. And so I think like in this era of AI, like a lot of people are looking for shortcuts all the time. And I've read a few posts of people being like, I don't need to do one-to-ones anymore because I can just like get, I can just do it all through like transcripts of meetings that I'm not sat in. And I just think that is, I'm not going to swear, but it's I just don't
terrifying
think
to
there are
me.
shortcuts. Yeah, it's crazy.
And if you're enjoying this, LeadDev has a ton more to offer.
I'm quite fond of the articles.
I feel like LeadDev blogs are my favorite, and it's been really, really useful to kind of create these more meaningful connections as well.
If there's something you're struggling with as an engineering leader, there's a pretty good chance that LeadDev has published something that addresses it.
So make sure you check out leaddev.com.
I want to move us on to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we found in there about learning and development, because I thought it was really interesting. But while we are on metrics, there's a couple of kind of comments and questions from the audience here, just talking about the idea of throughput and the importance of throughput. And so there's one from Anna here, which is like, how do you measure engineering teams' throughput? And then there's another comment here, which is basically like, DORA measures health, but throughput is what the business really cares about. I don't know, do either of you have a kind of strong view on throughput as a metric? I know it's not something we've discussed before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one thought that comes to mind is now I've seen a lot of engineering teams that experiment with cloud agents, right? Like you can just have an agent sitting in linear, and the ticket comes in, the agent just starts and creates a PR. So in that world, I just kind of question if throughput is really going to be kind of measuring what's important. I think it's more about what happens after the throughput. It's like what happens after it goes to production. Are we shipping really good quality code? Maybe mean time to recover, potentially not quite, but like something like that. It is like, okay, are we, maybe churn might be a metric, or like, are you shipping something and then kind of reverting it? Those are the things that I think become more important rather than purely looking at throughput.
Yeah, I think number of incidents is a really popular metric there as well.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, for us, the lead time to changes actually being in production is our metric that we're using to measure throughput, right? Because it doesn't matter if you've got a large amount of deployments that's happening very frequently, or some of these other, it's like that's the one that measures in a lot of ways how much capacity I think that you can handle, and that's a metric from DORA, right? How much capacity you can handle in some ways, because you can take that and there's some calculations that we feel like work pretty well with regard to the number of engineers and previous velocity, and we use that for historical information to essentially get a percentage of confidence that we'll be able to ship something on time. And that helps understand when we have projects that we're estimating out, if we actually, what level of confidence we think that we'll be able to deliver these in the time frame that we say, which I think goes directly to throughput. Like, do we need to add more humans onto this? Is that going to actually impact this in a way that's material, or is it not? That's, I think, for me, as someone who's managed teams, been really effective to understand what capacity my team has.
Yeah. And I want to move us on from metrics, but I can't because there's a really good question here. So sometimes you have the context and the full picture, but then your chain of command doesn't and takes numbers out of context. How do you manage that? Jezo, any top tips?
This has happened all the time. Classic question. I think one of my things was like, if we had a report, I would never send it out to my leadership without context, without me kind of adding an overarching narrative. of like, why are you seeing a drop in cycle time? Why is there's a drop in the X? I think it needs to, you kind of have to tell the story behind the metrics for it to make sense. And in one of my peers companies, we had a ritual that anytime there was anomaly, it has to come with commentary. Otherwise, there's just no way to interpret that. And I think the second thing that's more important is I think management and your leadership chain has to be aligned with that thinking, that metrics don't alone tell the story. There's more behind that. So they all also have to be like seeking that, like, what is the more contextual narrative behind these metrics? If they don't believe that, then I think there's a problem. Then it's like, okay, cycle time drop, there's something terribly wrong with the team, we need to fix it, go fix it. So
I think to your point, which you just suggested, that's something that I think is really important. If there's something that is an outlier, controversial, or like whatever, make sure it has context. Don't let the numbers speak for themselves. We have a standing kind of, unofficial policy, I'll say, of presenting over, sending messages or sending content, sending numbers or something like that. And I've probably made more slideshows in my time at O'Reilly than any other time. And it's not necessarily me sitting in front of a room presenting, but it's really just using that format of a slideshow to provide more context, to provide more information than just sending a spreadsheet would provide. The reason being is everyone's going to interpret numbers, differently. If I say my team is 25% effective at delivering new features, you might hear that, you might think that that's horrible, right? But what if they were just last 3 sprints ago, 5% effective, right? Like that's actually an incredible story. And so I think you need to provide whatever that information is. You have to manage that context yourself. In some ways, you have to provide that commentary and have to provide some level of storytelling around it. Like we as engineering leaders are storytellers, and ideally positive storytellers for a team, but sometimes the story is not a good story sometimes. But there has to be some kind of story there versus just delivering numbers and walking away.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to switch up and start to focus on the kind of learning and development section, because I think there's some really interesting stuff in there. And so the number that just really jumped out at me, we asked folks like, how much of a priority is learning and development? And like, frustratingly, like it's been low for a while. Like it's been kind of in the 50s or 60s, and then this year it jumped up to 83%. And I thought that was really fascinating, because I think that when things get chaotic or busy, learning and development tends to drop down the priority list. But there's something happening right now which has put it to the top. And I've got a couple of theories. Like I think there is, as with everything right now, an AI element of this. There's a new thing to learn and develop. And so I think there's a focus there on trying to kind of catch up there. Like I had an interesting conversation with someone from OpenAI a few months back, where they were saying like even their like biggest super user customers think they're behind. So like everyone thinks they're behind, and so that might be driving some of this kind of new focus on learning and development. But also like the hiring market is rough. Like people aren't able to really hire in talent like they were and kind of fill those capability gaps. So maybe you have to focus on the development of your team. Those are just my theories, but Sean, this is very much your area, so I'm interested in your take.
Yeah, like I'll give my little pitch here, O'Reilly. We have we're known for our content, our books and videos, and but we have a learning platform that really focuses on upskilling, engineers, upskilling business professionals with a huge variety of content and skills and topics. It's not just like learning Perl or learning Python or something like that. It's all kinds of different things. I think in my opinion, the job market is, this is not an opinion, the job market is terrible, right? It's horrible if you're looking for a job right now. And budgets are tighter, pretty much all around, I would say, from everyone I've talked to. I haven't heard someone say, it's a great time to be managing a budget. It's a really tough time. And what that means is, I think there's more investments in terms of individual engineers And there's more investments in terms of employees in two ways. One is you can't hire a new skill set nowadays. Like you can't hire it away and just go on a hiring spree. And so you have to invest more in the individual employees that you've got underneath you in order to get the skills you need to actually deliver things. And those things you're delivering, though, like there's a really huge innovation disruption cycle that's happening right now. I feel like with AI, and there is a huge amount of new skills that, I said before, 5 years ago these weren't in the lexicon, and now like they're required. And this is this really weird environment, I think, where you've got this investment in new employees, and there's new skill sets, and you're not really doing a lot of hiring, and those skills are really new too. And so I think that that's really why what's driving, that's my opinion at least, what's driving this uptick in learning and development. There's just, not as big a budget as before, and you still have to get the job done with these new frameworks, new tools. And I think that that is certainly driving a lot of this.
And Jessel, you are hiring, so it kind of provides different challenges for you.
Yeah, no, Sean, you nailed it. I think the talent market right now is very difficult. And the other thing I'll add is I've been hiring the whole year and been interviewing engineers, and it's been very interesting to see that younger engineers, shorter tenured engineers, they are very AI native. And they do really well in kind of coding interviews where you kind of have them bring in all your IDEs, AI IDEs and everything. But on the other side of the spectrum, like senior, more tenured engineers tend to struggle with the new tools. And they tend to kind of have their head buried in the sand a little bit, where it's just like, okay, I think I know I'm a very tenured engineer. I know how to ship code, but they're not necessarily leveraging all the latest and greatest tech. So that makes them inherently really so slow at shipping code generation, right? So that's I think kind of like what's driving the pressure is like when you have so many engineers that are tenured, experienced, but also kind of have a perspective on like how they want to build software and how they want to ship software. But now you're having like a whole paradigm shift in like how we actually build and think about delivering software. So that's, I think, like making the engineering leadership like this needs to be the biggest area we need to focus on. How do we upskill our existing team? And then I'll just add one real quick thing is like when it comes to hiring, like one thing that I've kind of noticed is engineers who are not necessarily AI native, but they're open and willing to learn in the new tech stack, they have tend to do really well. They've been like the best performers, even though they're not as tenured, because they're like, hey, I want to embrace the new tech, but I also have good engineering fundamentals, and those two combinations makes for a really great high performing individual and a team. So I think that's when leaders are seeing that and saying, hey, like, can we do that? Can we ignite that like passion for learning in our teams?
Yeah, that feels like the kind of profile that I would be looking at, regardless of what the hot technology is. You're looking for that kind of curiosity, that openness, but also, yeah, they've got the fundamentals. That's the kind of sweet spot. Jessel, you wrote a piece for us a while back about kind of the most important skills in the AI era. In our survey, we kind of picked out prompt engineering and managing agents. But as with anything in this space, it moves so fast. And so like, even when we were doing our prep call for this, I was like, I wish we had included building MCP servers in there, because that is, a really key skill now in this era. But there's 1,000 things that we didn't include. I'm just interested in, because you've been doing this hiring, you're obviously thinking about this. What are the skills outside of the kind of like general profile that you just mentioned that you are looking out for?
Yeah, I think the way I think about it is backing into like what is AI really good at versus what is AI really bad at. And AI is good at code generation, but it's really bad at context. And so that already kind of gives you like where's the gap? Like who do we need on the team? And the kind of people we need on the team are really good at sucking in the context of the organization, bringing in customer empathy, and then translating that into a plan of action. Where so there's a lot of the investment goes up funnel, where it's like, okay, communication skills, collaboration skills, world model building skills, context gathering skills, and then you translate all of that into your favorite AI tooling, and the execution is somewhat the last mile. If your prior thinking is not clean and crisp, the execution is not going to be great. So it's like garbage in, garbage out kind of situation. So that's what we prioritize is like, yeah, if you're lagging in some of the hard skills of like how to build MCP servers, that's not a problem at all. Like we just need you to be curious, leaned in, great at communication, and then I think that the rest everything will take care of itself.
Yeah, nice. And Sean, you get such unique insight here in terms of what people are looking at, what people are trying to learn about. Like, where do you see the kind of key skills here?
I think that there's, I think Jessel covered a lot of what I would cover, right? I think that, learning and curiosity still remain, to me, like a primary thing to look for whenever you're looking at a new hire. The landscape is moving really fast, and it seems really cliche to say, but it does feel like things have picked up very much, right? And I think that's because, like I said before, I think we're in one of those disruption cycles. And that's why I think focusing very hard on a specific aspect of AI driven development is kind of tricky, because it has the potential to become not as important in just a year, less than a year sometimes. So I'm always looking for people that are curious and that want to learn. And I also think that there's a big difference between people that have, I will say, embraced AI in the sense that it's part of their workflow. I think that there's a real fear in the community and in the industry around AI at an individual contributor level. And I think that speaks to what we mentioned at the beginning of this call, which was that discrepancy between manager and developer in some ways. I do think that I don't think AI is going to replace engineers. I think that engineers who use AI are going to be faster and more proficient engineers, as well, as long as they know how to use it well, right? And that goes back to that learning and curiosity. I'll also say that I think it's interesting working at a company like O'Reilly that has such a focus on content, and like we have a whole editorial department, right? And so I've got access to people that are great writers and that can produce content, super smart, super technical, very knowledgeable people. And the people who are really good at communicating, who are really good at writing, who are really good at speaking, can translate that really well into prompt engineering. Versus it feels like people who aren't as good at communicating have a harder time with that. And to Jessel's point about garbage in, garbage out, like I really think communication is one of those skills that super matters for any kind of prompt-driven development, because you have to be able to communicate effectively in order to get the results you want.
Yeah, nice. And then my last question is like, how do you like, that's obviously what you're hiring for right now, but how do you turn around maybe slightly more stubborn developers who are already in your team, who maybe aren't so much along for the ride? Sean, obviously you said that there is some fear, I think, underlying it for some folks, like it's coming for their jobs, or that they don't really want to pick up these tools. They they've used them a couple of times and it spits out garbage, and then they have to clean up the garbage, and it's like, I don't really want to do this. But it feels like a runaway train. So Jezil, is this something you've come across? Is it something you've been able to kind of manage through? How do you kind of overcome that maybe a little bit more stubborn skepticism?
Yeah, and I think engineers tend to be left brain, so we need to lead with the evidence. Like, is the tool that you're using, is it gonna really help you? And I think that's kind of where your hires that are very leaned in, that are very curious, want to learn, get better, you kind of have to leverage those team members, the advocates, to say, show them that, hey, like, yes, this is AI is like a Ferrari on a racetrack. If you kind of are not an experienced Formula One driver, you're going to crash right away in that car. So you kind of have to build some like techniques of how to steer the AI correctly, and then you kind of have to demonstrate that back to the team that, hey, if you just go in and type a simple prompt, it's probably not going to yield the right outcome. But if you prompt it in a certain way and here's some of the techniques to do it, then it's really going to accelerate your velocity. So yeah, it just comes down to like having some like brown bag sessions and workshops, showing the evidence to bring the skepticism around.
What about you, Sean?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money there. Like, I think what you're describing is, in a lot of ways bottom up versus top down, right? I think having something that like AI forcing that top down is not as effective as creating momentum amongst fellow engineers and making it be something that's more of a grassroots kind of operation. That's not to say that I think it is important for sometimes leaders to step in and say, like, set the tone and set the standard that this is something that's important for you to learn. And I'll also say create the space and bring that human aspect to it too, because we had a really great moment with our teams where an engineer shared that they were very uncomfortable with AI openly in a Slack channel. And that led to this individual finding people to work with and finding people to actually talk through this with. And it was, to me, it was a really powerful moment because you see, like, it's always great whenever people can be transparent and open in a space where it's not natural to be vulnerable in. And so that was really encouraging. But then also to see this individual really like start to learn and start to kind of understand and not fear and more be curious about AI was really interesting to see that too, because I saw how effective that bottom-up kind of approach can be. It wasn't this person's manager coming to them and saying, you have to learn AI, you have to use AI. Even though, like I said, I think sometimes that's needed. It was people around them, like the peers, being able to walk through, and we started doing AI tea times and having places to share and creating that space. I think it's been really effective and really helpful.
Perfect. Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for. But thank you so much, Sean. Thank you so much, Jezil. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in live. There's still loads going on in the Q&A, but I'm trying to pass what is more of a comment and what is more of a question. But as I said, we're going to go over to the Lead Dev Slack, and there's a webinar Q&A channel there. If there's anything you want to ask us that we didn't get to, go and post it over there and we'll try and get to it. Before you get out of here, there is the whole report available to you in the resources section. Grab that before you go. But I just want to thank O'Reilly for putting this session on, for supporting this report. And thanks again to Sean and Jezil, and see you both soon.
Thank you. This was super fun.